Some nights pass quietly. Others carve themselves into history with a force so heavy that even time hesitates to move forward. For Demi Lovato, July 24th, 2018, was that night. The night when sirens pierced the Los Angeles dawn, when headlines trembled with urgency, and when the world realized that behind her powerful voice lay a battle far darker than imagined. Her home in the Hollywood Hills, once filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of late-night conversations, became the backdrop of a crisis that stunned millions. Soft lamps still glowed in the early morning haze. A half-finished drink sat on the counter. A blanket rested on the couch, untouched. But the silence inside the house felt unnatural, thick, heavy, waiting. And then came the chaos. Paramedics rushing in, footsteps echoing across hardwood floors, whispered commands layered over panicked breaths. The world awoke to the news with disbelief. Demi Lovato, the girl who survived childhood trauma, fame's brutality, and her own inner storms, was fighting for her life. Her net worth, estimated at over $40 million, painted the illusion of stability. But fortune cannot quiet the ghosts carried within. Fame cannot silence the wounds ignored for too long. And behind the accolades, the tours, the soaring vocals, Demi had been walking a tightrope stretched thin between strength and collapse. That night did not define her, but it revealed the truth beneath the light. What happens when resilience breaks, when the weight becomes too great? And how does someone so adored, so talented, find themselves standing on the edge of everything they've built? How does a voice that inspired millions fall into a silence no one heard coming? Before the world witnessed her collapse, it first witnessed her ascent. Swift, brilliant, and burdened with expectations far too heavy for someone so young. Demi Lovato was born in New Mexico in 1992, raised in a family where music and performance flowed like a second language. By the time she was a child, the stage had already become both her playground and her armor. Her first steps into fame came with roles on children's television, where her smile, bright, fearless, almost defiant, made her stand out instantly. But the turning point arrived in 2008, when Camp Rock ignited her career with an intensity few could prepare for. At 16, she wasn't just an actress, she was a phenomenon. Her voice, raw and powerful, carried a maturity far beyond her age, blending pain and hope into a sound the world could not forget. Albums followed, tours sold out. She transitioned from teen idol to global artist with astonishing speed. Songs like Skyscraper and Give Your Heart a Break climbed charts, becoming anthems for millions who found solace in her vulnerability. But behind the applause, cracks began to appear. Fame demanded perfection, a polished smile, a steady image, emotional invincibility. Yet Demi's strengths were rooted not in perfection, but in truth. And truth rarely aligns with the narratives the industry wants to sell. Still, she pushed forward, delivering performances soaked in emotion, offering glimpses of her inner struggle through lyrics that trembled with honesty. Interviews captured her resilience, but not her exhaustion. Paparazzi captured her confidence, but not her tears. Her rise was dazzling, a meteoric climb driven by talent and sheer will. But meteors burn brightest just before they begin to fall. And behind the glowing arc of her success, a quieter, darker story was already unfolding, waiting for the night when everything would finally break. As the world celebrated Demi Lovato's rising star, the years leading up to her collapse painted a very different picture, one made not of spotlights, but of shadows stretching quietly behind her. Beneath the glamorous performances and award show appearances, she lived in a fragile balance, navigating pressures few her age could comprehend. Her home, often described as warm and filled with music, also carried an undercurrent of unease. Late-night pacing, whispered conversations, the lingering heaviness of unresolved pain. Demi had been open about her struggles, addiction, mental health, eating disorders. But candor did not erase the weight she carried. It only revealed how deeply she had been fighting. The public applauded her honesty, yet the same industry that praised her demanded constant productivity, albums, tours, interviews, leaving little space for healing. Recovery is not linear, But fame offered no room for pauses, no time for relapse, no permission to be human. Her schedule intensified, her circle changed, and the silence around her grew louder. Friends noticed shifts, a distant look, a quicker temper, a growing isolation. Her days blurred together in a cycle of studio sessions, rehearsals, performances, and long nights where exhaustion settled into her bones. In quiet moments, she often retreated to dimly lit rooms, sitting alone near windows where Los Angeles lights flickered like distant stars. Close enough to see, too far to touch. She tried to regain control through routines, through confessions shared in documentaries, through the steady hands of those trying to help her. But pain has a way of slipping through even the smallest cracks, especially when layered with old scars. And slowly, a relapse began to take shape. Not in sudden moments, but in tiny decisions, in fatigue disguised as strength, in expectations too heavy for a young woman still learning how to survive. From the outside, she seemed stable, smiling, performing, reassuring the world she was okay. But inside, the ground was shifting. The nights grew longer. The walls felt tighter. And as she moved through these final years before the collapse, one truth became inevitable. The storm was returning. And this time, it would not whisper. It would roar. The night of July 24th, 2018, began like many others in Los Angeles. Warm air drifting through open windows, the glow of the Hollywood Hills resting quietly under a sky heavy with summer heat. But inside Demi Lovato's home, the atmosphere felt different. There was a stillness, a fragile, uneasy calm that seemed to settle over the walls like a warning. The hours leading up to her collapse are a blur of half-remembered conversations, unanswered messages, and choices made in exhaustion rather than clarity. Music played softly in the background. A half-empty glass sat on the counter. The lights were dim, their shadows stretching long across the polished floors. And then, without warning, the night broke open. Paramedics were called at dawn. Their footsteps thundered through the hallways. Flashlights swept across the silent rooms. They found Demi unresponsive, her breathing shallow, her pulse faint. The scene was quiet. Too quiet. Broken only by the sound of urgent voices trying to pull her back from the edge. Outside, neighbors gathered behind curtains, watching as emergency vehicles filled the narrow street. The rising sun cast a pale light over everything, turning her home into a place that felt unreal, suspended between life and loss. News broke in waves, each headline sharper than the last. Demi Lovato hospitalized. Possible overdose. Critical condition. Fans wept. Celebrities posted messages. The world that once celebrated her strength now braced itself for the possibility of her death. But inside the hospital, beyond the cameras and public sorrow, doctors fought to stabilize her. Machines beeped steadily. Nurses whispered updates. Her family held their breath in hallways too cold, too bright, too sterile to contain the emotional chaos unfolding around them. What the public didn't see were the moments immediately after she woke. The confusion, the shaking hands, the tears she couldn't hold back, the fear that lingered in the corners of her eyes, the realization that she had nearly crossed a threshold she could never return from. Why must a young woman reach the brink of death before the world sees the depth of her suffering? Why does silence always precede tragedy in the lives of those who carry the heaviest hearts? That night did not destroy Demi Lovato, but it shattered the illusion that she was ever unbreakable. 5. In the days that followed her collapse, Demi Lovato's world narrowed into the sterile quiet of a hospital room. Machines hummed beside her bed, their soft beeps marking the fragile rhythm of a life pulled back from the edge. The sunlight spilling through the blinds seemed different, colder, almost hesitant, as though unsure whether it should touch her so soon after she had slipped so close to darkness. Her family sat close, speaking in low voices, watching over her with the kind of fear that only comes when you nearly lose someone you love. Her net worth, estimated at over $40 million, suddenly felt meaningless. No amount of fame or fortune had shielded her from the storm that nearly claimed her life. The mansion in the Hollywood Hills, once a symbol of achievement, now felt like the echo of a life built too quickly, too brightly, too loudly. What mattered now was breath, heartbeat, recovery. the simple, quiet things she had once taken for granted. After her release, Demi stepped away from the spotlight almost entirely. She retreated into rehabilitation centers where the days were slow, structured, deliberately calm. Her world became one of routines, therapy sessions, group meetings, long conversations about pain she had spent years swallowing whole. In those spaces, stripped of celebrity, she confronted the fractures that had shaped her. Childhood wounds, industry pressures, the relentless demand to appear strong while feeling anything but. Her recovery was not linear. There were moments of progress followed by nights of doubt, days when she felt hopeful, and days when the weight of expectation pressed heavily on her chest. But this time, she walked the path with a different understanding. Survival required surrender, not performance. Her home, once filled with noise and constant visitors, grew quieter. She filled it with soft music, warm lamps, and letters from fans who had survived similar shadows. Photographs of family lined her shelves, reminders of what anchored her to the world. Slowly she rebuilt her career, but on her own terms. She returned to the studio, her voice raspier but richer with truth. She appeared in interviews not polished but honest, speaking openly about the night that changed everything. And something remarkable happened. The world listened. This time not with voyeuristic fascination, but with empathy. For her story was no longer about fame or failure. It was about survival. Every step forward became an act of defiance, a refusal to let the darkest night of her life define the rest of her story. Her fortune, her fame, her platform, she began to use them not as shields but as tools to advocate for mental health, addiction recovery, and the right to be imperfect in a world obsessed with perfection. Yet even as she reclaimed her future, mysteries lingered. The unanswered questions about the hours leading up to the collapse, the people who drifted from her life afterward, the scars she still carries quietly beneath the surface. Some rooms inside her story remain locked, not out of shame, but out of self-preservation. Because healing is not forgetting, it is learning to live with the memories without letting them drown you. And in Demi Lovato's Long Road Back, the world witnessed something rare, a star who almost disappeared, finding her way home one fragile step at a time. 6. In the quiet years that followed her collapse, Demi Lovato emerged not as the flawless pop idol the world once demanded, but as something far more human, a survivor shaped by wounds she no longer tried to hide. Her voice, once polished by studio perfection, carried a new texture, heavier, wiser, trembling with the weight of everything she lived through. It was no longer the voice of a girl rising to fame. It was the voice of a woman who had walked through fire and refused to disappear. Her life today is steadier, not perfect, never perfect, but grounded in choices built from truth rather than pressure. She advocates for mental health with a conviction carved from experience. She sings with a clarity sharpened by vulnerability. And while the world continues to admire her talent, it is her honesty that resonates most deeply. Her story exposes a truth many ignore, that survival is not triumphant or glamorous. It is messy. It is painful. It is earned in moments no camera will ever capture. So what remains of the night that changed everything? Not tragedy, but transformation. Not shame, but strength. Not an ending, but a beginning forged from the edge of loss. Because her legacy is not defined by the collapse, but by the courage that followed it. And her future, fragile, luminous, unfinished, stands as proof that even the darkest nights can give way to a new light. Le silence ne tue pas la mémoire, il la purifie. Silence does not kill memory, it purifies it. And in that purified silence, Demi Lovato's story continues. Steady, honest, and undeniably alive.